Dr. Anthony Harper here, blessed to be at the Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast with Chris Mitchell CBN. Thanks for joining me. And a lot has happened since we were together at the U.S. Embassy opening ceremony in Jerusalem in 2018. What are some of the top stories you've been dealing with here in Israel, since that time?
Well, since that time, I think that, first of all, that was an amazing experience, a real watershed moment in U.S.-Israel relations to have the embassy move there. I think probably the main thing after that would be the Abraham Accords, where, Arab nations for the first time in history have normalized relations, the UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco. And perhaps in the future, Saudi Arabia will do that. But I think that's probably the main thing. In addition to that, I would say the rise of Iran, its continued effort to get a nuclear weapon, almost now to weapons-grade enriched uranium, developing ballistic missiles, and also, who knows, secretly trying to miniaturize what would be a warhead to put on the ballistic missile. So I would say those two things, I think, are big developments here in the region.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's been a rise of anti-Semitism. How have you seen that rise of anti-Semitism being played out, with what's going on with the judicial reform here and attempts to get rid of the Netanyahu government?
Yeah, there's two things. That's probably the biggest divisive thing that's happened in Israel in the last several months when the new government got into office around the end of 2022. And I think it's been a really battle since then about judicial reform, trying to balance the executive, judiciary, and the legislature here in Israel. But more than that, really trying to overthrow the Netanyahu government and delegitimize it in the eyes of the people. It has seemed to have had effect if you look at the polls, but the government is still in power, and hopefully they're optimistic, or at least some of them, that they will be able to get some sort of balance in judicial reform back into the Israeli government. But we'll see.
Well, during the Obama administration, regarding about overthrow of the Netanyahu government, there was V15 One Voice, and I've heard about these billboards around Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. Have you seen any billboards that were portraying Netanyahu as a dictator, trying to get people to oppose his government?
For sure. I mean, you can see the banners there almost every Saturday night in Tel Aviv, where maybe more than 100,000 will gather. Obviously, there's a lot of funding that's going on under these rallies, and there has been a minor contribution by the State Department to one NGO, but I think the State Department seems to be tipping the scales, or on the side of many of those who want to oppose judicial reform. President Biden came out and basically said maybe the government should drop it. So I think the State Department is I guess kind of coming on the side of those that don't want judicial reform, and as well as the White House.
Mm-hmm. I know there's a lot of serious issues dealing with here in Israel. CBN has a website for people to learn more about what you're doing and reporting in Israel. So the website for CBN?
CBNnews.com, it would be the way to do that. We also have a program twice a week called Jerusalem Dateline. You go to JerusalemDateline.com. Try to go more in depth of what's happening in the region and here in Israel.
I remember that special video time that we had at the U.S. Embassy opening ceremony in Jerusalem. A very historic time, wasn't it?
Very much so. It was, as I said, a watershed moment both for U.S.-Israel relations, and I think what happened during the Trump administration by moving the embassy, recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital, recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, all that I think was a indication that probably President Trump was the most pro-Israel president in Israel's history, even more than President Truman, perhaps, but he has certainly had a historic role to play. But I think that was a blessing on America, based on Genesis 12, 2 and 3, those who bless Israel would be blessed. And I think Israel reaped the benefit, the U.S. reaped the benefit of that promise. And unfortunately, I think the Biden administration hasn't been nearly as pro-Israel as the Trump administration was. And I think the U.S. can feel that effect as well.
Well, I know it's very troublesome because President Biden just recently released a video saying he started a task force to combat anti-Semitism in all of its forms, but yet money of the Biden administration is going to UNRWA as well as Palestinian Authority. That's created a real disconnect there about saying on one hand you're opposed and then money given.
That was a big change. I mean, one of the biggest changes, I think, in the two administrations was the refunding of the Palestinian Authority, UNRWA, which is a UN organization that oversees Palestinian refugees, but what they do with much of that money is indoctrinate a generation after generation of Palestinians who expect that they will go back to their land they had in 1948, and that they will basically take over Israel and drive the Jews into the sea. The curriculum sometimes can be quite explicit, all funded by the nations of the world, including the United States.
I just think about finally what you said about the concerns about we've been talking about the rise of anti-Semitism, but President Trump and his Abraham Accords. I know that there was a peace plan map that came out with Jared Kushner showing the Palestinian state idea. I had a meeting with Michelle Bachmann on that matter. She was noticing that there was a change for President Trump and more political problems happening in the release of the support of that peace plan map dividing Israel. Are you aware that there might have that Abraham Accords would not have happened if that map had not come out showing that Palestinian state?
Well, I think there was a big debate at the time, and there was internally a lot of Israelis wanted to declare sovereignty over parts of the West Bank, especially the Jordan Valley, I should say West Bank, known as Judea and Samaria. Or would there be normalization with some of these Arab countries? Because I don't think the Arab countries were willing to normalize relations if Israel declared that sovereignty over that land that supposedly would be for a two-state solution. So there was a big decision to be made, and I think the decision was made to go with the normalization instead of the sovereignty movement. And so I think that at that time, and some people, and I know Michelle Bachmann, I think, was one of them, who felt like by declaring a two-state solution, you're in effect dividing God's land, and there are consequences to that. So Prophet Joel said that in chapter 3. So I think some people believe that the Trump administration really suffered the consequences of trying to divide God's land.
Very challenging issues. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
And people learn more information about at your website. Once again, is CBN News?
CBNnews.com. Yeah.
Okay.
And JerusalemDateline.com.
Yes. I'm Dr. Anthony Harper here. This is the Roman Colosseum here in the back here. This is the city of Rome, and I'm here on my way to Israel. Very historic place here on Wednesday, May 9th. In light of Israel's 70 years of independence from the surrounding nations, they are a power now that has the military ability to defend itself. You think about the helplessness of the Jews way back in AD 70. That became to light here on the Mount of Masada, just overlooking the Dead Sea. I was there not too long ago, where the Jews were helpless on the Mount Masada when the Romans armies advancing to kill them, and they end up killing themselves because they didn't want to be taken captive by the Romans. But now, AD 70, of course, that was the destruction of the temple by the Romans. With 70 years of independence, they are a power that can defend themselves. And this is very significant for me. I have ancestry that used to work for Caesar Roman prefects on my mother's side. So I'm here a couple thousand years in the future, heading to Israel to recognize what's going on there with the U.S. Embassy opening in Jerusalem. That is a very historic event. It's supposed to take place on May 14th. So this is quite the experience here, and I'm going to be leaving tomorrow for Israel for all these wonderful events.
I'm Dr. Anthony Harper here. It's a very historic time in Jerusalem. The opening of the U.S. Embassy here, like I said, very historic in light of the number 70. It was in the year AD 70 that the Romans destroyed the Jewish temple here. Now it's 70 years of independence for Israel, and Israel is now more powerful than Rome. Earlier in the week, I was at the Colosseum, in the Roman Colosseum. They talked about the helplessness of the Jews in Masada when the Roman army was advancing. Here we have a very historic time of 70 years. President Trump announcing to the world that Jerusalem is the eternal capital of Israel and establishing the opening of the U.S. Embassy here in Jerusalem in the Arnona neighborhood. A very blessed time of the meeting. Here we're going to be starting here very soon, the formal ceremony. And for Christians around the world are so very excited. I know that they are praying about this event for this day and for everyone in Israel. A blessing to be here in this historic time.